And it looks like we're live. Guys, give me just a minute. You know the drill. Let the stream breathe for a second. Get the Facebook groups in here. Get our wonderful, awesome Huddle Up Podcast Network, Mile High Huddle Podcast Network community in here on a wonderful Friday evening here. Mile High, hello, everybody. Broncos country, welcome into another episode of the Dove Valley Deep Divers podcast. I'm your host, Lance Sanderson, and joining me as per usual is my good friend and colleague. He is Mile High Huddle's senior NFL draft analyst, the one and only Erick Trickel. And dude, we are inching closer and closer. Exactly, I believe it's the 28th, I believe, is exactly the 2 weeks away from today is the opening of Denver Broncos training camp. And as we usually do around this time of the season, we're going to go through the Broncos 53-man roster projection, just kind of break everything down for you. But before we get into that, man, how you doing?
Doing good. Not tired for a change. Got a nice 3-hour nap in before the show and was able to, hop in a shower, really wake up and excited to be here Friday night as I am every time. It's good to see you. It's good to see everybody in the chat. A little bummed about the weather. I mean, we got a couple nice days of weather up here, and now it's supposed to be raining again today after having it basically rain every day for the previous 3 weeks. So that's a bummer. But Broncos football in general, it's about to kick back up. 2 weeks until it started training camp. Not long after that, we get preseason games. And then not long after that, it's back to the regular season. So exciting time. And you know what? We've just about made it through, the dead time of the football season. June and early July are always so difficult to get through. Not a lot happens. At least in May, we have, covering everything that happened in the draft, a little bit of the final free agent moves leading up to it's all draft and free agency. But June hits and it's just dead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's nice to, you get a little bit of football there for a minute, OTAs, mini camp, stuff like that kind of goes on. And you get just a little bit of taste there to round out the last part of May, a little bit of the beginning of June. But that last half of June until actually tomorrow when the franchise tag deadline hits, it's pretty dead around the NFL scene. We got Dylan Von Arks in the chat doing his thing behind the scenes, making sure that moderating and things aren't getting out of hand behind there. But he's telling Erick, his parents are on vacation in Alaska at the moment. And actually, I have a couple of friends of mine from down where my folks are at that are in they're in Anchorage right now, so they're going on vacation as well. So this is obviously the time. If you want to go up to Alaska and go see some beautiful scenery, the summertime is definitely the time to do that. Before the chat even got started, go ahead.
Except when it's raining. When it's raining and it's cloudy out, it really takes away from the views. But yeah, I hope your parents are having a great time in Alaska. I reiterate this all the time. I don't care for living here. It's not my favorite thing. It's so far away. There's not a lot to do, but it's an absolute beautiful place to live, and it's such a great place to visit. I hope they're having a good time, and I hope anybody who visits Alaska has a great time up here.
Yeah, likewise with Wyoming, and we're actually finally going to get another rainstorm in here. It's been pretty dry for the last couple of weeks. After June, it rained damn near every single day. But enough about the weather. Let's jump into some football here. And before we do that, though, got to give a shout out to our boy Troy, who jumped in before the stream even got going with a $10 super chat, saying, "Hey guys, I hope 3 undrafted free agents earn spots." Not because of injuries, though. Jaleel McLaughlin, PJ Mustipher, and Thomas Incoom. Erick is actually going to kind of satiate your desires here in just a little bit. Let's get into it, though. Actually, quickly, we got to grab Michael. Michael Ronquillo jumping in here on Facebook, as he always does every single night, every single show, sometimes even in the mornings as well, jumping in here, throwing some support down. Michael, we definitely appreciate you, man. Saying good evening, Lance and Erick on Dove Valley Deep Divers. Go Broncos and buck 'em. And Lawrence Rivera as well, throwing some stars around, saying that at least Taylor Swift is enjoying Mile High. So, yeah, you know what? Shake it off, man. It's going to be a lot of fun. I would love to go see a Taylor Swift concert. Not that I'm a Swiftie, but you know what? I hear she puts on a damn good show, and I do kind of enjoy her music a little bit. Erick, what do you think on Taylor Swift? Are we getting too much into the weeds here?
I have no opinion on Taylor Swift. I'm not a super big music person, and all I know of Taylor Swift is that her song, at least used to be, her songs were all about breakups and super depressing and just not enjoyable to me. So that's my opinion there.
That's fair enough. It's the music that we grew up to, and I have a soft spot in my heart for the song Blank Space, because my guys I Prevail covered it and turned it into a metal song. And if there's one thing that Taylor Swift does really well, she writes great songs that metal bands cover and make even better. So that's the love that I have for Taylor Swift. Anyways, hello to Jeff. Hello to Todd. We've got Dylan in the house as well. Lawrence, Jimmy Bate. We've got John Libick in here. New name saying good evening, gentlemen. So good evening to you, John, as well. Cristiano Roden is in the house. Zach Powers as well. What's going on, Broncos country? Welcome in here to a wonderful episode of Dove Valley Deep Divers podcast. Let's jump right into it here on a beautiful Friday. Eric, we kind of talked about this last week a little bit, any big questions that are still remaining on the roster. You've been working through an article series, kind of giving percentages of the positions, the players at each position, and like what the percentage is that they will potentially make this roster. You've culminated that up today. I believe that dropped earlier this morning, your 53-man roster projection for the Denver Broncos. Last week, we kind of started off, we're going to do the same thing, going through the quarterback position, offense down through that, starting defensive line, moving through the secondary on the defensive side of the football. But we talked about it last week, man. Quarterback's pretty well cut and dry. It's going to be 3 quarterbacks, at least for your projections. You have Russell Wilson, you have Jarrett Stidham, and you have Ben DiNucci making the final 53-man roster. Now, something that I noticed right away looking at this is, like we talked about last week, you have 3 quarterbacks making the roster. Why is that?
So my biggest thing is with the new rule, or not new rule, old rule coming back about the 3rd quarterback spot, they have to be on the 53-man roster. They just don't have to be a game day active. They cannot be a practice squad call-up, but they still can be dressed and everything just in case of emergency. That and Sean Payton's, history with pretty much always keeping 3 quarterbacks, like just kind of put you there. Is like 3 quarterbacks. It was a final change. Like I'm typing it up. I have everything down. I have all my numbers. And I'm like, oh, I got 2 quarterbacks. Who's the guy that's going to get left off for that 3rd quarterback, which we'll get into here in a little bit as well. So yeah, that's the biggest reason why I went 3 quarterbacks. And then then my focus shifted of, is it going to be Ben DiNucci or Guarantano? And experience here just kind of led me in the way of Ben DiNucci.
Yeah, and that makes the most sense. I mean, Ben DiNucci has a couple of stars for the Dallas Cowboys back when Dak Prescott got hurt, and then I believe it was Cooper Rush was the other quarterback that they had that went down that season as well. So DiNucci at least has starting experience in the NFL, and I definitely agree with you on this one. Another quick question that I want to bounce off you before we grab Gary here is just the history with Sean Payton. Is it like, if I remember correctly, he typically carried 3 quarterbacks on his rosters while he was as the head coach at New Orleans. Is that correct?
Yes, if I remember right, there was 1 year he kept 2, but after the first week, it was back up to 3. It was just a matter of the whole veteran contract aspect, right, if I am remembering correctly. Outside of that, every single year, it was 3 quarterbacks on the initial roster, and it didn't change a whole lot throughout the season.
Yeah, and like you said, with the rule coming back into effect that you can still have an active game day quarterback, that it has to be on the roster. It's a 3rd quarterback in case of emergency situations. A big reason why that was brought about was because of the Brock Purdy incident that happened in the playoffs this last season, where Brock Purdy went down, and then I can't remember the backup that went down behind him. The 49ers essentially had to start Christian.
You can't remember the backup?
Oh, it was Josh Johnson. That's right.
Josh Johnson.
It was Josh Johnson, former Denver Bronco Josh Johnson. It took me a second to get there. But they ended up playing Christian McCaffrey as a wildcat quarterback for essentially the entire second half of that football game. If you at least have a 3rd quarterback that's available to you on game days, he has to be a part of the active roster, but he can still be available for you on game days as an emergency quarterback where you don't have to have a guy like Christian McCaffrey throwing the football around.
It essentially makes game day actives from 48 to 49 with that 49th being the quarterback.
Yep.
That's basically the only difference for it. And what's funny to me is this whole rule change, as you said, it came about because of the San Francisco 49ers, but their 3rd quarterback on the roster couldn't even play in the game. It was Jimmy Garoppolo. He was still dealing with the broken foot. So it's just kind of ironic that's what brought the rule change about, was a situation where it wouldn't have even mattered. But Gary Palmer coming in with the $4.99 donation. Thank you, Gary. We appreciate you so much. Gary. He says, hey, Lance, Eric, Scott, and Dylan, I am ready for some football. Go Broncos, #Buck'em. Yeah, we are too. Like we were talking about the start of it. Like I'm so excited that it's almost the football season. A lot more excited than I was a year ago. Like I'm excited as much as I talk about Russell Wilson and the negatives of it, as much as what I've said about Sean Payton, I am excited to see what they are able to do together. I'm excited to see if Russell Wilson can turn it around. I'm excited to see what this new offensive line can do. reimagined offensive line, really.
Mm-hmm.
If the running game can get going, I'm excited to see the defense and seeing if they're going to be a little bit, take that step back. So I got I got a lot of excitement for this season, and it's even more excitement than I did going into last season.
I'm more cautiously optimistic going into the season. And a big reason is just because the whole Russell Wilson situation. Like I want to believe that he's going to, I do think he's going to have a bounce back season. I want to believe that, but it's one of those, until I see it, I'm going to kind of just hold my breath a little bit and really see, Sean Payton's been out of the NFL for a year now. He's got kind of got this breath of fresh air, essentially, perspective, bringing in, putting his players in a position to actually succeed. So I'm just curious to see what it really looks like. Last season, I was stoked, man. Like I was all about Russell Wilson, Nathaniel Hackett. They were talking about being super innovative on offense, and it was a disaster. So maybe getting back to a sense of normalcy, getting back to an actual. And Eric, you and I have gone back and forth on this multiple times. I don't want to jump into that now, but the preseason last year was, in my opinion, and several other people's opinion, a disaster. The way things were run behind the scenes was a disaster. To have an adult in the room and Sean Payton, a guy that's been there, he's been to the pinnacle. He's had multiple different teams that have made it to the NFC Championship game in New Orleans. Like I have the optimism there. I just want to see, and I'm piggybacking your point here. The defense, I'm very curious on if they do take that step back. Going back to the offensive side of the football, though, let's move down to your list here just a little bit. The running back position was one I was not necessarily very I can't disagree with it, just the way you have it structured. But I do have a curious question that I want for you. You have Samaje Perine, Tony Jones Jr., I believe it was Jaleel McLaughlin making the roster, and then Michael Burton as the fullback, making it 4 running backs here. You have a note here. It's actually the first thing that you talked about in your article. And make sure you guys go check this out at milehighhuddle.com. It's the 4th article down. Really easy to find. Eric does a great job here. But the one point that you brought up was what the Broncos were going to be doing with Javonte Williams and why he is not officially on the opening 53-man roster. What's your thoughts, buddy?
Well, first of all, it's Tyler Beatty, not Jaleel McLaughlin making it.
Okay.
Biggest reason for that is, and I've talked about it a lot on here, McLaughlin coming from Youngstown State to the NFL, even though running back's an easier position, that's still slightly too big of a jump for me to be comfortable putting on it. He's definitely part of that competition, though, and depending on what he does in preseason, he could definitely take that spot. I went with Tyler Beatty for now just because Tyler Beatty, despite only having just a handful of snaps and 2 touches, it's still some experience, and he played at the SEC and already has that year in the NFL to grow accustomed to it just a little bit there. And then Javonte Williams. Obviously, he's not in my top 4, but I do have him making the initial 53-man roster. So kind of a slight change here. This isn't, the initial 53-man roster. Over the first 48 hours, the roster changes a lot after the initial one because for players like Javonte Williams who are hurt, you have to be on the 53-man roster initially and then placed on injured reserve 24 hours later to be able to be called back up. And that's what I have with Javonte Williams. So making that 53-man roster initially, only to be put on injury reserve so he can be called back up a little bit later. And Tony Jones Jr. being the one to come in and to fill in that final spot. Michael Burton, full-time fullback, special teams player. That's going to be part of the offense. He's going to be there on defense as well. So just that's the only real difference here. And it's the only player that I did that with. They're going to make it on the initial 53-man roster, but not. I'm just not comfortable enough to have Javonte Williams on the 53-man roster and cemented there because I do think that he's probably going to miss the first few weeks at the very least.
Right. Zach Powers actually coming in here with the question I was actually going to ask you right to follow up on Javonte Williams here. Wouldn't they just stick Javonte Williams on the PUP list to start training camp? Because if they do that, then he carries through onto the PUP to open the season. And I believe it's first 6 weeks.
Yep, he has to miss the first 6 weeks.
Yep, exactly. Yep, that was the question I wanted some clarification on. And then after that, they have 2 weeks to get him to practice, and then 2 weeks after that before he would be able to return. So he has to miss the first 6 weeks. If he then comes back this week 7, it would be they have 2 weeks after that first practice to reactivate him to put him back on the 53-man roster, right?
Yeah, and if I did this in May, I would have gone the pup route with Javonte Williams. But everything that I've heard, what it seems with where he's at in his recovery, it seems like they want to. He may start camp in preseason on PUP, but they want to get him off there. They don't want him on PUP to start the season. So I don't think that he's going to miss. I don't think they want him to miss 6 to 8 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're looking at 3, 4, maybe 5 weeks.
Okay.
Of him missing, which is why I went the injured reserve route and being able to call back up. But PUP is still an option. I mean, he could suffer a setback during recovery. There's a lot that can happen and can change with the status of Javonte Williams between now and then. Just like as I was talking about with Tyler Beatty and Jaleel McLaughlin, a lot can change there. Just right now, I felt more comfortable going the injured reserve route.
Right, and going just to continue on the conversation of the running backs here, you do also have a note in there that adding a free agent, this is a quote directly from the piece, quote, adding a free agent is entirely plausible and probably a route the Broncos take. However, this projection is based on players currently on the roster. So Tyler Beatty wins the job for the third spot as a change of pace, explosive home run type back. We talked about it a little bit last week, but I do want your thoughts again. Is there any specific name that you would like to see the Broncos bring in at the running back position as a veteran free agent?
I mean, we've talked about it a lot. I mean, Dalvin Cook, Kareem Hunt, like it's just something every single week for the past few weeks. We've always talked about free agent running backs. Mm-hmm. A lot of guys out there still available. A lot of guys that can make sense. If they want to go with somebody who is more powerful than Leonard Fournette or Ezekiel Elliott over Tony Jones, makes sense. More home run hitter style than Kareem Hunt, maybe Dalvin Cook. Like even though things seem to be heating up between him and Miami, if they can figure out the money there. A lot of options out there, so just plenty of ways they can go.
Right. Before we get to wide receivers here, we got our guy Keith Brugman jumping in here from the Denver Broncos Roundup podcast. What's up, Keith? Thanks for joining us, man. Asking an interesting question here, and I think that I want to piggyback a little bit off this. Is Russell Wilson being set up for his biggest rushing season, especially given Javonte Williams' injury, and also I don't want to say necessarily lack of talent, but lack of quality depth in the running back room? No. Why is that?
You realize that he has almost 1,000-yard season rushing.
Say what?
He has almost 1,000-yard rushing season under his belt.
Okay, sorry, you broke up there. I apologize for that.
In 2014, he ran for like almost 900 yards. No, I don't think that's what they're going to be going for. From what I understand, they kind of want to keep the ball out of his hands a little bit. I think he'll have a decent rushing season, probably somewhere around the 300 to 450, 500 range, which is still like up there for his rushing seasons. But no, the biggest of his career. I mean, no, like I don't think he eclipses 600 yards. He might add about 5 or 6 touchdowns, but like, no, not the biggest.
Well, I think that quite honestly, he's still capable of being a 450 yard, maybe 500 is pushing it a little bit, but 400 to 450 yards. I think if you can get that out of Russell Wilson, I think you pretty much maximize the rushing ability that he has right now. He's still capable of doing it, but like you said, I don't think that they're actually kind of looking in that direction. So I definitely agree with you on that one. Let's move to the wide receiver position. You have 6 wide receivers making the roster: Tim Patrick, Jerry Jeudy, Courtland Sutton, Marvin Mims Jr., Marquez Callaway, and KJ Hamler. So what's kind of just the breakdown of what your line of thinking is here, specifically with Hamler and Marquez Callaway?
So Patrick, Jeudy, Sutton, and I want to note that these are in the order I think they'll end up on the depth chart too.
Okay.
So Tim Patrick, number 1, Jerry Jeudy, the number 2, Courtland Sutton, the number 3, Marvin Mims, number 4. Those guys I think are all set at this point, barring like a last minute huge trade coming in for Courtland Sutton. He's on the roster. Like that's the only point that can thing that can change at this point. Marquez Callaway, I have him making it, as I've talked about multiple times before. Special teams ability, his reliability, and his familiarity with Sean Payton and the offense. If one of those receivers, top 3 receivers, aren't ready to go, or they get banged up a little bit, have to miss some time, Marquez Callaway is right there in the wings, ready to step up and kind of fill in a role. He's got a good, versatile enough of a skill set to kind of fill in for almost what all 3 of them do. Jerry Jeudy being the one that's a little bit harder for him to fill in. And then KJ Hamler. The 6 receiver spot was probably the most difficult for me to project because there's so many different ways they can go. There's Jalen Virgil, there's Kendall Hinton, there's Montreal Washington, there's Brandon Johnson. There's so many ways that they could have gone. And I went with adding just a little bit more explosive ability to the offense, something that this offense has been lacking. And with the other 5 receivers they had, Marvin Mims is the only one who really does that. Jerry Jeudy can be an explosive guy, but he's not that deep threat guy that can take the top off a defense. He wins with his route running, getting separation, and making plays happen that way. Mm-hmm. KJ Hamler, Marvin Mims, those are speed guys that can take the top off a defense. They can work underneath and have, find an opening and make them pay or make defenses pay for it. And just adding that kind of player to back up that role is the way I went. And I went with KJ Hamler over. I mean, there's positive notes about his injury recovery. He's expected to be ready to go. But I went with him over Jalen Virgil because Jalen Virgil, until I see it, he is still a track star playing football. Mm-hmm. I got to see the development with the route running. KJ Hamler, he's at least decent there. He at least has that shiftiness down to, get open up underneath pretty quickly. So that's why I went with Hamler as a 6th receiver over one of the other guys.
Yeah, just the ability to take the top off of the defense. KJ Hamler, there's not an official 40 on his resume. I don't believe he's actually run an official timed 40-yard dash. He did have a hamstring injury going through the combine and everything like that, so we never actually got to see that. But he is one of the most electric, fastest football players, probably the fastest football player on this Broncos team, if we're being completely honest. But he's just never been able to stay healthy, and it's such a shame. We've got a Facebook user here I want to grab a comment about, because I really like this, especially given what Sean Payton has done with in the past with players like Marcus Colston, with guys like Michael Thomas. He says, and pardon me for not being able to see your name, StreamYard's not allowing us to actually see it, but he says that I expect to see Courtland Sutton in the slot a decent amount. What's your thoughts on that?
I mean, it's possible, but I think that their ideal plan is Jerry Jeudy in the slot most often. The reason why I have Jerry Jeudy number 2 and still being the slot guy is when they go through wide receivers, Courtland Sutton's coming onto the field as that as the X, Jerry Jeudy sliding into the slot. I think most of the time we'll see them in 2 tight end sets, though, leaving 2 wide receivers out there on the field, being Tim Patrick and Jerry Jeudy.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I actually agree with you on that. I do think we're going to see a lot more 12 and maybe even 22 personnel, especially because you have Michael Burton out there as well. So get a lot of heavy head cracking, skull breaking, running, like power running is a big thing of what we're going to see here. I think that pretty much covers everything that I had for you on the wide receiver room. Or actually, you know what? One quick last question here. Obviously, we don't know the landscape of the NFL right now, but if a team does have a significant injury at the wide receiver position throughout training camp, is it still a possibility that the Broncos could potentially move on from one of the top, I guess I don't want to say top 4 guys because Mims is probably going to be a lock on this roster, but let's just go Tim Patrick, Jerry Jeudy, Courtland Sutton, or KJ Hamler. Is it possible that the Broncos move on from one of those guys?
Well, I mean, KJ Hamler is the 6th receiver. I don't think his spot on the roster is super secured.
Right.
I mean, there is still the torn pec. I mean, despite comments coming out that he should be ready to go by the start of the season, that's still a mystery, and it depends on what way the coaching staff wants to go. So KJ Hamler, he's not safe no matter if they look at if another team wants to trade for him or not. Right. I don't see why another team would. As for the other receivers, Tim Patrick, Jerry Jeudy, and Courtland Sutton, as I said earlier, only way I think that any of those changes happen to those 3 is a team comes in offering something big for Courtland Sutton. I don't think Jerry Jeudy and Tim Patrick are going to be moved at this point. Okay. I don't think the Broncos want to move them at this point. So Courtland Sutton's the only option. And if Courtland Sutton does get moved, I would probably put Kendall Hinton on the roster instead of Courtland Sutton.
That makes a lot of sense with the reliability that he has. He has some versatility too. He can play outside, can play inside, reliable hands. It's just a do-it-all kind of wide receiver that may not be the most talented player, but you know what? You can trust him. And he's a damn good player in that locker room as well. So I really like the point that you got for that. Zach Powers, which is quickly here. I guess it is a contract year for KJ Hamler, so it's time to find out what he is. And IR isn't a great way of doing that. Yes, and Zach, you're absolutely correct on that.
And that's part of the point. Like, maybe they can get him out there on the field. They can get some stuff out of him. And then maybe, before the trade deadline, somebody will come in and offer something for him. Yeah. Just like they're on the cusp. Denver's doing fine, good enough without him that they don't need him. Another team just needs that explosive wide receiver, or they lost their explosive wide receiver and they come in just throwing a late round pick your way for a KJ Hamler. I think that's kind of the sense. That's the sense that I'm getting with what they kind of hope to happen with KJ Hamler. But it all depends. Can he stay healthy? That's always been the question.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely correct. It's like I've said, I don't know how many different times. It's so frustrating that KJ Hamler hasn't been able to stay on the field, because when he is healthy, he is incredibly electric. Let's slide inside here just a little bit. Let's go to the tight end position. This was, I don't want to necessarily say a surprise to me, because I think that it's probably going to happen. Where the surprise comes is the practice squad. But you have the Broncos keeping only 3 tight ends on the roster. We've talked about this probably 3 or 4 different times. Albert Okwuegbunam did not make this list. You have Greg Dulcich, Chris Manhertz, and Adam Troutman, who are the guys. We already know, you and I went kind of back and forth a little bit about Greg Dulcich, and I came to my better senses. I think you're absolutely right. I think he's poised for a huge year this year. They went out and got Chris Manhertz as that blocking tight end. You can throw him out there on the at the point of attack on the strong side of the play. He's going to be essentially an extra tackle for you. And then Adam Troutman is another, versatile player, a guy that is a quality blocker. And I'm not going to say he's an elite blocker, but he can get out there and handle his own and offer some receiving chops. Not necessarily very many surprises here, but I want to kind of dive into the practice squad here. You don't even have Albert Okwuegbunam making the practice squad. Why is that?
Well, we'll get to that when we get to the practice squad a little bit.
Okay.
The biggest thing with the 3 tight ends, and it's kind of right there. If you guys can read it on, read it. You guys can also go check it out on milehighhuddle.com. Typically, 4 tight ends is the norm, but when you have that, typically one of them is filling in as your fullback. And last year, the Broncos kind of went a different way. They kept 5 guys with one of them being a fullback, which is also outside the norm. And so it just was kind of like trying to find the balance for it, and roster math played a huge part in this. There wasn't somewhere else I wanted to take away from to add Albert Okwuegbunam to the roster. There just wasn't anybody. And I think that there's a chance that he can make it. I mean, it's going to depend a lot on the preseason. He's got to show that he can be what they want him to be. He's got to show that he can improve as a blocker. He's not good enough as a receiver to overcome those issues. So that's why he's not on the roster. Greg Dulcich, I mean, they've called him the Joker. He's going to be a big part of this offense. They're hoping that he comes around as a run blocker, but his receiving ability is a big enough threat that you can kind of live with it a little bit. Chris Manhertz, Adam Troutman, I mean, you got your blocker, and you got a guy who can just be kind of your all-around guy. And also, I mean, Greg Dulcich, he dealt with injuries last year, but Manhertz and Adam Troutman, they both have been relatively healthy throughout their careers, which is another reason why I was comfortable going with only 3 tight ends here. Michael Burton, just kind of, that being that fullback, just takes away from having that 4th tight end.
Well, and just to kind of expand a little bit here on Albert Okwuegbunam, I don't believe he's ever played a single snap on special teams. And if it was like a field goal block. Like, it's not like one of the core 4 special teams, punt return, kick return, kick coverage, punt coverage, like the core 4 special teams units. He's never done that. And if you don't have that special teams versatility as a 4th tight end on the roster, then you don't really have a spot to be on the roster. They're going to find somebody that at least can go out there and compete on special teams. Albert O's just never been able to do that. Manhertz has, Adam Troutman has, Michael Burton has been a very good special teams player throughout his career as well. So Albert O on the outside looking in. Go ahead.
You are correct. As Scott says, Albert Okwuegbunam has not played any snaps on special teams. None. No matter what unit, none.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if he got in there on a field goal block. So that's why I wanted to make that caveat. So thank you for the correction there, Scott, or at least clarifying that. So we appreciate that. Going inside another spot on the offensive line, you have, let me see here. I gotta jump back over here. I believe you have 3 offensive tackles, because you did it. You actually broke it down into offensive tackle, offensive guard, and then center position. So you have it broke down 3 different ways here. But the 3 offensive tackles that you have, pretty cut and dry here. Garrett Bowles starting on the right side, Garrett Bowles on the left side, Mike McGlinchey starting on the right side, and then Cam Fleming, who you and I both really had a lot of high praise for going through last season. He played very well, one of the best right tackles that the Broncos have had, and then played pretty well on the left side as well. So he showed he has the versatility as that swing tackle. The one thing that I do want to get into a little bit is Quinn Bailey, but that we'll get into here in just a minute. What's the overall thinking, though, behind just having 3 offensive tackles on the roster?
Well, first off, Lawrence Rivera comes in. Is our wide receiver core injury prone? We'll have to use all our wide receiver again. That's my worry this year. Yeah, that is a worry. I mean, Tim Patrick, he has an extensive injury history going back to college. It's part of why he went undrafted. He dealt with a lot of injuries at his time at Oregon and Utah. Courtland Sutton, he's been relatively healthy, except for the one season a couple years ago. Jerry Jeudy, he's had his bang-ups. Marcus Callaway, fortunately, he's been a little bit healthy. So yeah, how the injuries questions around the wide receiver position is a major concern, and we will definitely touch back up on that when we get to the practice squad, because that is a big reason why I projected some of what I did for the practice squad even. The injury concerns at wide receiver, super worrisome for me. As for offensive tackle, I only have 3, and this is where the whole thing was, as I was talking about earlier, that third quarterback. I wanted to keep Quinn Bailey on this roster because Quinn Bailey is at least versatile enough to play inside and tackle. He's kind of got that versatility a little bit, though he's much better at tackle than he is inside at guard. But I had to take somebody off as that for that third quarterback, and Quinn Bailey was that 53rd guy. So it's like, that's the guy that comes off. That's the last one. That's a position that makes sense to pull somebody away, even though this is another position where I have serious injury concerns. Garrett Bowles coming off his bad injury. Mike McGlinchey has injury history. Cam Fleming gives me enough confidence, at least for now, to back up one of them. Hopefully you're not losing both of them in a game. Hopefully we don't lose either of them and they play a full slate of games this season. So it was tough for me to keep only 3. I really wanted to keep 4. I tried working roster math to make it work. I just couldn't find a way. But Cam Fleming, he's a good quality backup. He can play both sides of the line. He did really well last year for the Broncos. Hopefully Garrett Bowles can bounce back and play closer to, that 2020 season, right? 2020 season. Can play much closer to that than he did last year. And hopefully Mike McGlinchey plays at the level that he can play when he's healthy, which is an extremely high level. So it's definitely, there's some concerns here with injuries here.
Well, I guess you have. Go ahead. Finish your thought. But I got a good question for you, though. Go ahead.
I just want to grab this real quick. Going back to it, keeping 3 quarterbacks. I don't get Facebook user. Not sure who you are. We can't see it due to settings that you have on it. The reason for 3 quarterbacks is with the rule coming back that you can keep your third quarterback can dress and play in case of emergency. The emergency quarterback rule. They have to be on the 53-man roster. They just don't have to be at game day active, which means they don't have to be one of the 48 dressed.
Yep.
Technically, it gives you a 49th player.
Yep.
But in order to do that, they have to be on the roster. They can't be a practice squad call-up. They have to be on the roster. With the injury concerns that Russell Wilson has going forward, keeping that third quarterback was a must. Not only that, it is what Sean Payton has pretty much done every single year throughout his career.
Yeah, and we talked about that a little bit more in depth and in detail at the beginning of the show. So make sure you go back and check that out at the top of the show after you get after the fact here on the podcast. So thank you for the question, but that's the big reason there, and I agree with Eric on that. Where I want to, and I think you said it correctly here. It's more of a necessity to keep that third receiver or that third quarterback. Excuse me. You've got 2 positions here that I want to kind of. I don't want to get to the one yet because we're going to get that here in a second. But we just went over it with KJ Hamler. You're talking about a player that's the 6th wide receiver on this team. Now has all the injury concerns and stuff like that. They've got the same kind of an archetype of a player, smaller receiver with a lot of speed, and Marvin Mims. Is KJ Hamler really in that conversation as the 53rd guy? And could Bailey take that 4th spot as the offensive tackle and kick KJ Hamler off the roster? Is that a potential possibility there?
No, I think that 6 wide receivers is what we're going to see. Okay. Whether KJ Hamler is at 6'1" or not, that it depends on so much.
Right.
I mean, this is a projection being made 2 weeks before the start of your training camp, so keep that in mind. But 6 wide receivers, that's just standard. That's standard for Sean Payton. That's standard for the NFL. 6 wide receivers. So I don't think that you're taking one of them, especially with all the injury concerns that you have, with Tim Patrick coming back from his injury, with Jerry Jeudy and his injury history, with Marvin Mims being a rookie. I don't see taking a 6 wide receiver and giving it to that spot to an offensive tackle.
No, that's a fair point. That's definitely a fair point. And most teams typically like to keep 6 wide receivers. I think the Broncos a handful of years ago under Vance Joseph, I think they only kept 5 one season, but that's because they kept 7 freaking off-ball linebackers or whatever the hell it was. And
on the initial roster,
weird. Yeah,
on the initial roster. After 48 hours, they were up to 7 wide receivers and 4 linebackers.
Yeah, it was
because they made so many changes.
Yeah, it was a really weird breakdown on the initial opening day roster. I just remember that was one of the things that you and I and Nick, I believe is who it was, had just a big conversation. Like, what in the hell is Vance Joseph doing keeping these 7 off-ball linebackers on the opening 53-man roster? Regardless, where the roster math gets really interesting here is moving to the offensive guard position. And it's not necessarily that the numbers that you have there, it's the player that you have here. And you have obviously Quinn Miners, you're starting right guard. You have Ben Powers, you're starting left guard. But you bring in Kyle Fuller, a guy who played as a center formerly with the Seattle Seahawks, has experience snapping the football to Russell Wilson. This is the name that I thought was the most interesting one that you kept around over Quinn Bailey. Why did you do so? Just break that one down for us.
So I wanted somebody who can be a peer backup on the interior. You have your peer tackle backup. You have your swing backle, somebody who can play all 3 spots on the interior, where the injury and the performance questions are also there. Kyle Fuller, most of his experiences come at center, but he can play guard. He's done it before, and he did decent there. I mean, he wasn't ever great at center or at guard, but it was decent enough. So just having that extra versatility to snap at center, especially with the questions that I have at center, that's kind of the way I went. I've heard a lot of hype around Kyle Fuller coming out from within the Broncos and everything like that. When what they project him to do at one point, the chatter was that he's going to compete for the starting center spot. So maybe that still happens. Maybe he does take it during training camp and preseason, but at the very least, I wanted him on the roster somewhere because of all that I heard. And when I look at the other peer interior offensive linemen, the peer guards, Henry Bird and Will Sherman, neither one of them inspire confidence. I'd stick with Kyle Fuller over those 2.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. And it also makes sense when you look at the center position here. You have Lloyd Cushenberry, who, let's get to the hot take here, is not going to win the starting center job. You have Alex Forsythe is actually the guy in the article here winning the starting center position. But we all know there's trials and tribulations of Lloyd Cushenberry. He's one of the players that I still have not found out a reason why he is still a Denver Bronco. He's been a bottom 5 center in the NFL since he was drafted and has not shown hardly any improvement, especially as a pass protector in the A gaps. When they like to bring over low pressure and bring an extra body in the A gaps, he can't figure out how to pass it off. He doesn't have the functional strength to actually play the center position at the NFL level, at least not at a high level. So keeping Kyle Fuller here actually makes a lot of sense. I do want your breakdown, though, on Forsythe. Is it specifically the trials and tribulations, or do you think that Forsythe is going to be like legit as a center moving forward as a rookie?
So real quick, money did factor in on this. Money-wise, keeping Fuller over Bailey is not a smart move. The only difference is $25,000.
Yeah,
that is a difference between them. That is not enough for the finances to make a significant impact on the decision here of keeping Quinn Bailey over Kyle Fuller. Mm-hmm. It's $25,000, $940,000 cap hit for Quinn Bailey, $965,000 for Kyle Fuller. That's the only difference there. So as for this, is from everything I've heard, I think Alex Forsythe has a good chance to take the starting center job. Mm-hmm. Like I said that the night of the draft after he was drafted, I could see him winning it. There has been nothing but praise for the guy throughout the whole draft process. There's a lot of guys, big offensive line guys, that absolutely praise him and what he can do, his versatility, his smarts, how quickly he picks things up. If he goes out there and he shows all that, obviously, like that's a huge factor here. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think he can easily take the starting job over a guy who has consistently regressed as a player since he was drafted. Mm-hmm. And it's not just season to season. Like the first half of his rookie season was pretty good, and then it got worse from there. Mm-hmm. And then then the 2021 season, like it started off decent and then got worse from there. And then the same thing with last year. It started off all right and then just continuously got worse. Mm-hmm. So a guy who has constantly been on a downward slope, I don't think he's going to be secured in making the roster outside of the fact that he's at least experienced. Mm-hmm. Like he's got decent experience, but so does Kyle Fuller. Maybe this is where a cost-cutting move could potentially happen. I didn't go that way because the other backup interior offensive linemen, like unless they go get a veteran, just miss me with the other guys. Like none of them are guys that really stand out to me that should be rostered at this point. And again, Quinn Bailey, for me, he's more of a tackle than a guard. Mm-hmm. When he's played at guard, he's struggled a lot more. So that is one reason why I didn't want to put him at guard either, like over Kyle Fuller.
Right.
is adding that extra interior flexibility and him being better at center, at tackle. So yeah, that's just kind of why, for all those moves.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense. You've made it the most versatile. And that's something that I've always, I've preached multiple different times here on Dove Valley Deep Divers, specifically offensive and defensive line and in the secondary. The more hats you can wear, the more versatile you can be, the more valuable you are to an NFL franchise, because there are only so many roster spots that you can occupy. Guys that have left and right side versatility, inside and outside versatility, guard center, whether that's guard center or guard tackle, like you have to be able to play multiple different spots. And the more that you can do for an offensive line, specifically as a backup, the more likely you're going to be a very valuable player to an NFL franchise. You did mention one thing, though, and before we get to the defensive side of the football, I got two things I want to grab here. You talked about earlier in the article talking about bringing in a free agent running back. Free agent center is definitely a position that I still have my eyes on. I haven't really taken a look at what's available, but Joe Mannix coming in here saying the Browns might cut Nick Harris at center later in this in training camp preseason. What do you think of Nick Harris? If the Browns let him go, you think that the Broncos might be interested in his services?
Isn't he still on his rookie deal drafted just like 2 years ago?
Yeah, I remember you were very, very high on him coming out of Washington. So I do believe, yes, he's on. Actually, I think he might be second contract player now. I'm not sure, though. Okay.
No, he was drafted in 2020, same year.
Okay, as Cushenberry.
So, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, if they're cutting him, it's for a reason. He's been terrible with them. He played a little bit as a rookie, and it went god awful. Mm-hmm. He didn't improve in 2021. He didn't play at all last year. Mm-hmm. So yeah, if they're cutting him, it's not because it's not saving money. It's just he's not quite good enough. Maybe that's a route I would look at as a practice squad candidate, but not for the roster. Biggest thing is like he was light coming into the NFL.
He was, yeah.
And I don't know if he's put on enough weight to really handle the scheme that the Broncos are going to be running. Like it's going to lead to him getting bullied. So that's also a question.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, he was sub 300 at the combine. So
he was like 293, 290.
Yeah, 290. I think it was 294. But regardless, doesn't really matter. That's I guess a big thing is even going to his time at Washington, he struggled with playing with power and strength at the point of attack as well. Like he's more of a mover and he would have been a really good fit for I believe it was Rich Scangarello's offense. He would have been a really good fit for that. Outside zone, we might see some of that here in Denver, but I think that being
not gonna be
Baker, it's not gonna be prominent. So,
and sorry, it's just funny to me that the chat's talking about height and offensive line. Alex Forsyth, I saw somebody ask that. He's 6'4", like Coach Barry's 6'3". If height is a big issue and you really want Russell Wilson to see the middle field, then go get Nick Harris. He's like 6 foot flat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We got one question here. Obviously, Eric, I think you've seen it. I know that Nick shared it in the group chat. The Denver Broncos released a statement, an announcement the other day, an announcement on July 25th. They have a announcement coming up. Last I remember, this was a while ago, they said that they were going to be releasing a new helmet. It was an all white helmet with white face mask, I do believe. And if you look close enough at the picture on the announcement, it does look like the curvature of the top of the helmet with, I'm guessing, the D logo on it. Eric, what do you think, man?
One of these days, Lance, you'll get that I don't care about uniforms. I don't care what. Well, that's not true. I do care what they look like. Like they do need to look decent, but I don't get all caught up in like, oh, this is what they should be wearing, or this top with these pants. It doesn't work. Like I don't care about that. I don't care enough about the uniform. I care about the product on the field, and uniforms, helmets. That has absolutely nothing to do with any of it. Yeah, so I don't care enough.
It's going to look really nice, that white helmet that they're going to be releasing. The reason I brought that up is we got Savage Boy Kev over on Twitch that wanted to just kind of throw that and did we think it was going to be helmets or if it was going to be uniforms? I do believe it's
an alternate helmet.
Yep. It's only going to be a helmet. All right.
Defensive side going to be the old school D, like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's going to be. I think it's going to look super sharp. That's just my personal opinion, and I'm excited for it. I know that you don't care about uniforms. I don't necessarily care about them. It's not the be all end all, but I do enjoy at least watching aesthetically pleasing football. a lot better when they win, but at least if it looks good, then I can be all right with it.
Only,
let's go to the
only
defensive side of the football here.
Only uniform thing I care about is they go back to those brown and yellow ugly ones. But that is actually a sentimental reason for me, like that we don't need to get into. But that's the only thing I care about. Bring those back. I'm fine.
Yeah. Defensive side of the football, obviously interior defensive line. First, you've got 5 guys on the roster: DJ Jones, Zach Allen, who the Broncos brought in free agency. Obviously, Mike Purcell at the nose tackle. And then Matt Henningsen and Ioma Owazurike make up the bottom 5 of that. Pretty cut and dry here. You and I have kind of talked about this. No Jonathan Harris is not necessarily noteworthy. You and I have gone back and forth about that as well. And you also do have in here, quote, adding a free agent defensive lineman could be in the works instead of betting on 2 second-year players for the depth. There's also a possibility of keeping 6 players here, but the roster math didn't work out for these projections. Is that because you have the 4 running backs and I'll just drop it right now, 5 safeties on this roster?
No. So the 5 safeties also going with 6 corners to spoil that a little bit. Typically you only keep 10, but I went one more. I was basically going 5 corners, 5 safeties with your returner being a cornerback. The biggest where this actually changes is I was debating 5 defensive linemen and 6 edges, or 6 defensive linemen, 5 edges.
Okay.
So this is where it could flip. If they do bring in another veteran, then I'm fine taking off that 6 edge and going to that, because 11 guys for defensive line edges, that's pretty standard. And you can typically play with it depending on how it's built. So defensive line, I have plenty of questions here. Going with bringing in another veteran, that's fine. And if you're bringing in a veteran, then you're probably going to 6 interior defensive linemen, which means 5 edges. Nothing wrong with that. But for now, I made it very clear early on. It was a note before the article is that I was going strictly off of what is currently on the roster.
Yep.
There is not a 6 defensive lineman for me on this roster to make it. PJ Mustipher, he was one guy I considered, but he's a pure nose tackle. We don't need another one of those. Tyler Lancaster, I considered him, but he was like the 56th, 57th guy for me, so it just didn't quite make it there. All the other defensive linemen were behind that even. And basically it's saying that the starting unit, it's going to be DJ Jones kind of as a 3-4-eye technique, Zach Allen as a 5 technique, Mike Purcell as your 0-1, Henningsen and Ioma Owazurike kind of filling in behind that a little bit. You got to see a lot of progress from them. Second year players, both had flashes last year. Now it's time to see the growth and the improvements that they need to make.
Yeah, I'm just curious to see if they're going to play Owazurike more along the 3-4-eye, get him in between guard tackle and just let him use that burst off the line of scrimmage, or are they going to actually slide him towards the inside and play him in between center guard as a 2-eye or even a 1 or 0 technique? And just Owazurike.
No.
So is he going to play the majority of the time between
3 to 5?
3 to 5. That's what I figured. That's his best role, in my opinion. I think that the burst that he has and the ability to get skinny in between guard tackle is definitely the way to go with him. That first step explosiveness he has is just ridiculous. But he doesn't have the physical strength to hold up against guard center along the interior and really be that true pivot guy at the nose tackle position. So that was the one thing I was just kind of curious of, and I'm with you lockstep on that. Getting to the edge position here, I'm going to kind of run through this a little bit faster. We're getting kind of towards the end of our time here this evening, but the edge position, you obviously have 6 guys bringing in here. Frank Clark, obviously the free agent guy the Broncos brought in just about a month ago or so. He's definitely going to make this roster. Obviously, Randy Gregory, you're kind of tied up with him financially. Baron Browning, former 3rd-round pick, got to get healthy there as well. But you have Jonathan Cooper, Nick Bonito, and then Thomas Incoom is that 6th edge defender. Why Incoom? What's the deal with Thomas Incoom here?
Run defense. It's the same reason why I have Cooper above Bonito. Run defense. The other edge rushers that I'm looking at for this, Aaron Patrick, he's a pure special teams player. You have Chris Allen, who at this point, I have no idea what he's going to be able to do as a run defender. He struggled with it in college. Thomas Incoom, I believe, in my opinion, is significantly better than both of them when it comes to run defense, and he could fill in on special teams right away, filling in for Aaron Patrick. That's the reason why I went there, but that's also the same reason why if they go get a veteran defensive lineman, then I'm fine taking Thomas Incoom off. He happened to be the best option between the edges and defensive lineman for filling in taking that 11th spot among the 2 positions. So that's the only difference here. I believe the top 5, they're pretty much set. I'm barring like a late move of Jonathan Cooper and a late unlikely move of Nick Benito. Like, I don't see either of those happening, to be clear here. Like, those are your top 5 guys. Who's the 6th one going to be if they even keep 6? Roster math for me, again, just keeping that no defensive lineman. Well, I'll go with a 6th edge instead.
Right. And something I want to ask you here, and this is, kind of projecting a little bit, maybe a little bit of speculation here regarding Thomas Incoom. You watched it a little bit at Central Michigan, him playing inside as a 4-eye technique. Is that potential possibility? I know it's undrafted rookie free agent here, not necessarily the best role for him, but is there like a sub package, a possibility that he could be seen as a 4-eye guy, maybe even a 5 technique, playing directly over the tackle, and then have another edge defender on the outside of him, a speed guy, let's say Baron Browning and Thomas Incoom on the same side of the field, working that 5 and 9 technique. Is that a possibility there?
I mean, yeah, I don't think he's going to have a role on defense unless injuries happen.
Right.
And his play style is very similar to what Frank Clark's play style.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He is that guy that you can set him up as an edge, you can line him up inside as a 4-eye, 5 technique, and just, create mismatches on the defensive line, putting another speed guy outside of him. So you have that option with him, but you're just not going to see it unless injuries happen, which with this edge room is entirely plausible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So off-ball linebackers here, pretty cut and dry. You've got obviously Josie Jewell, I believe it's Alex Singleton, Josie Jewell in order, Drew Sanders, and Jonas Griffith. Yep, that's the order it is there. Pretty cut and dry. We talked about this last week. Really the only thing that makes a change here is if Drew Sanders shows to be, and you put this in the article here, if Drew Sanders shows enough and another team is making a great offer for Josie Jewell, is probably is unlikely. This is going to be the 4 guys moving forward for the Denver Broncos. Yes?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing with Sutton. Denver floated Josie Jewell around in trades after the draft, after they landed Drew Sanders. Nothing happened. Maybe a team comes back on that during training camp. I doubt it. I think Josie Jewell and Alex Singleton, they're going to be your starters. Drew Sanders going to be filling in that 3rd role. Jonas Griffith as your special teams guy and depth player. And it was like, who's going to be the last guy? It's Jonas Griffith because there is no one else.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody wants to make an argument for Justin Strnad? Go ahead. Like, I'll probably tune out. Justin Strnad just hasn't done anything. Seth Benson, he's an undrafted free agent.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Ray Wilborn, completely forgot he was on the roster until I was doing this whole project.
Right.
Which on that note too, real quick, this whole roster projection is going off of my tier list that I've talked about, and we've floated out there on through multiple shows, multiple articles on it, putting each player in certain tiers. Well, everybody in tier 1's on the roster. Mostly everybody in tier 2's on the roster. Some tier 3 guys managed to make it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just kind of what this is going off of.
Yeah.
And then as we're running late on time, cornerback, no surprise, Patrick Surtain, Damari Mathis, Quan Williams, Riley Moss, they're all going to make it. Talked about it earlier, Tremont Smith, he's making it as my returner guy. The only question here was the backup corner, Asang Basi or Jaquan McMillan. It could go either way. I went with McMillan because I really like what he showed against the Chargers to end last season.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And for me, he showed a lot more in just that one game than Asang Basi has shown in his whole career so far. He actually can handle crossing routes in front of him, unlike Asang Basi. So that's the reason why I went with McMillan over Basi.
And that makes a lot of sense. And I'm glad that you brought that up because Asang Basi, he's slow. Let's just be honest. He's not the greatest athlete at the cornerback position. He was good at Wake Forest, don't get me wrong, and I really liked him. I thought that he was a really good fit for what Vic Fangio liked to do. Being in man coverage, working across the middle, especially on crossing routes, he's going to get picked on too much. McMillan is a much better athlete and a much better fit for the system, so that's a really good shout here. And we kind of talked about this just a little bit. 5 safeties. This was one where I was very interested in the direction that you went, specifically the list that you have here. Obviously, Justin Simmons, Caden Stearns, those are your 2 projected starters. Kareem Jackson brought back as a veteran guy. You have J.L. Skinner as safety number 3 and P.J. Locke rounding out the room. J.L. Skinner's another one of those guys coming off of a torn pectoral muscle. Sounds like he's well ahead of his schedule in his recovery. But you actually think that he's going to come back, make this 53-man roster, or is this another one of those pup situations where they just kind of slow play it a little bit, let him get healthy, and then bring him back towards the later end of the season if somebody goes down?
I think that I think injured reserve ability to come back is a possibility with JL Skinner. I don't know where he's at with his recovery exactly. It has just been made very clear that he's well ahead of schedule. There's been some talk that he can be ready by the start of the season. That was what I was going off of. Setback is also possible. I believe it's more likely for him to be ready by the start of the season than Javonte Williams, which is why I didn't go that route for Skinner as well. But I think that if he is healthy, the role for him and the role for Kareem Jackson can work. What's the right word here? Can work. I totally forgot the word of it. It's not the same role, so you're not going to have them on the field at the same time.
Right.
But they can rotate as that third safety depending on the down distance and situation, depending on what role that you want out there on the field. And then PJ Locke, for me, he's just developed into a good special teams player. Hasn't seen a lot of snaps on defense, but special teams this late, the fifth safety, special teams is where it matters. So special teams is where you look at.
Yep. Michael Ronquillo jumping in here. Great show tonight, Lance and Eric on Dove Valley Deep Divers. Go Broncos and Buckham. Thank you, Michael, for that. And thank you for your continued support across every single show here on the Mile High Huddle Podcast Network. We definitely appreciate you, man. Go ahead.
Just real quick, Jeff Noyes comes in seeing this, talking about losing teams don't receive a lot of trade offers. 100% untrue.
Yeah, that's not true. Dylan actually has losing teams sell off their best players for draft compensations to try to rebuild and move forward.
Winning teams don't trade players that are helping them win. Mm-hmm. Losing teams trade players that aren't helping them win.
Mm-hmm. And winning
that's just how it is.
Yeah,
like,
winning
losing teams trade players, winning teams don't.
Yeah, winning teams are acquiring talent from losing teams, guys that are trying to move on so they can give up draft compensation. Because maybe exactly there you go. That's a prime example there. Von Miller was traded away for a second and third round pick on a team that I believe at the time was 3-5. Like they were not quite out of it all the time or all the way, but they were definitely on the outside looking in. It wasn't like the Broncos were going to be very competitive the rest of the season. The Rams gave up a second and third round draft pick to get Von Miller, and then they went and won a Super Bowl. That's how that conversation really goes.
Winning teams trade for good talent off of losing teams.
Yep.
Now getting back to this to round it out, again, going just strictly what's on the roster. Well, there's only one special teamer at kicker, one special teamer at punter, one player at long snapper. They all make it just by default. Mm-hmm. Not a lot to go in there. Then practice squad, just to cover it up. I do think a fourth quarterback being kept on the practice squad is there. Jaleel McLaughlin, though I don't think he's ready now. I do have him making the practice squad. Now, going back to the whole injury question that was earlier from Lawrence Rivera, Jalen Virgil, Kendall Hinton, and Brandon Johnson all making the practice squad because of the injury concerns. Being able to call them up and work that depending on who you're playing against. All that 3 wide receivers to help cover up those issues. Like when I was trying to figure it out, that was the first thing I did was like 3 receivers who's going to make it. Who are those 3? That's going to be a little bit more up in the air, but it was pretty easy to settle down once I got KJ Hamler as the 6th one. All right, Kendall Hinton, Brandon Johnson, Jalen Virgil. Those are the other 3 guys that I was talking about. They're making it. No Albert Okwuegbunam on the practice squad even. Instead of going with Nate Atkins, who I believe is a little bit more versatile than Okwuegbunam, being able to play a fullback, play out in the slot, play wide, play in line, a little bit more versatility, a little bit more there to develop. Plus, he was a guy who was picked up by this coaching staff and not a guy that's being handed to him after being in the doghouse for 2 straight coaching staffs. Quinn Bailey, offensive line, no surprise there. He was the final guy left off. Isaiah Prince, Christian DeLauro, both these guys, there's been some hype about with them and the development that they're showing, especially DeLauro. So I wanted to keep him. He's a guy that kind of intrigues me to see what he does during the preseason. I wanted to keep one interior offensive lineman, and I literally flipped a coin. Heads was Henry Bird, tails was Will Sherman. Like, I don't know enough about either of these guys and what they can do in the NFL. Henry Bird, well, it was heads. Then the foreign player, Nabwisi, I think is how you say the last name. As I talk about here, with how hyped the Broncos were to get him, I think they want to continue to develop him and see what he can do and just give him a little bit extra time. I did want to fit an extra interior defensive lineman on here, but it would have come at the cost of a wide receiver, and I just wanted to keep 3 wide receivers here.
Yeah.
Maybe I could have bumped off Henry Bird here, but again, you want a couple interior one of the tackles, sorry, not Henry Bird. Maybe I could have bumped Prince or DeLauro off for another defensive lineman. I considered it, just didn't do it. Chris Allen, giving him more time to develop. Ray Wilborn, Justin Sternad has been a disappointment. Seth Benson, undrafted free agent. Wilborn, somewhere in between. Why went his way. Art Green, developmental cornerback. A lot of tools, just needs to be worked with. Whoever loses between McMillan and Bassey, I think makes the practice squad. And then Delarian Turner-Yell, I mean, he was fine on special teams. Didn't really play a whole lot. I think he played 2 snaps total on defense. Mm-hmm. So that just kind of like, I'll keep him around because, I mean, at least he can provide help on special teams if like PJ Locke gets hurt, because injury history has been there with PJ Locke. So part of why I went there.
Yeah. Everything you did there makes sense. The one thing that I was going to not really push back, but it was just a question. You answered it well enough. The Nate Adkins over Albro Kuwabenam, is that also – the practice squad doesn't count against the salary cap, if I remember correctly. So that could be it's not really it does. Okay. So there's some salary cap implications on that there as well. So that was another thing that I just wanted to bring in there. First things first, nice work. I think you pretty well have it narrowed down and pretty well pegged for what the Broncos are going to be looking at moving forward. The tail end of the roster math always gets a little bit weird and wonky. You know, whether it's five safeties, 6 edges, you know, a 6 wide receiver, whoever that may be, getting an extra offensive lineman on there is always the roster math is always super tricky, especially the last 5 to 7 guys is really where it gets kind of shaky there. But I think you have it pretty much in the right direction. I agree with a lot of what you had to say. Like I said, I think Quinn Bailey would be the one player, and you kind of agree with me on that one. If you could find a spot for a 4th offensive tackle, a guy that can add just a little bit more versatility to that offensive line, give you some very outside and then inside versatility, I think that would be the only direction that I would really give you some pushback. But other than that, good job, man.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, going with the roster math, that's one reason why I like watching Hard Knocks. Is every year, at least one point during the episode, they reference roster math. Can we afford to keep this guy over this guy with the roster math? That's where things make difficult. And what makes it even difficult is teams are constantly finding new trends, new ways to go, creating more versatility. 5 years ago, 10 offensive linemen, standard. 2 at each spot. That was standard. 5-6 years ago, like that was standard. Now 8. Like you have your 5 starters. You have a backup swing tackle. You have a backup tackle guard, typically, or 2 backup interior offensive linemen. Like some form of that. Interior defensive linemen, edge numbers, those are changing. Defensive backs, the number of defensive backs is changing as teams are going to more 5-6 defensive back looks. They're increasing. So always trying to stay up with that also adds a little bit of difficulty to it as well. So yeah, I mean, I'm curious to see once after the initial schedule is out, and it comes out on the 29th, which is what, a Tuesday. Typically it's a Tuesday. The following Friday we'll have to pull this up and we'll have to take another look at it and see just where I was wrong and talk about what changed everything during camp and preseason.
I can't wait to tell you how much you suck at your. I'm just playing, man. But anyways, with that, guys, we're gonna get the hashtag out of here. It's 7:04 Mountain Time. You all have a wonderful weekend. First and foremost, and also, guys, make sure you get back at us. You want to continue on the conversation? Find us on Twitter. Follow me at LanceS_MHH, for Erick at Erick Trickel. We're both in the Mile High Huddle Superfan group as well, kind of commenting back and forth on that, throwing articles down. The conversation's always available. You just got to be able to find us. Go around and check out all of our social media platforms. Follow Mile High Huddle on Twitter specifically, but also follow the Superfan group on Facebook. Guys, there are 3 things everybody should be doing, no matter what. By this point, I've mentioned I don't even know how many different times. Down at the bottom of your screen, you're going to see it. Maybe if I can find the ticker. Here it is. Subscribe wherever you guys are watching this on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, Apple Podcasts. Definitely helps us out a lot. Leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. We'd love to read those as well. Like every video and article you guys see across all social media platforms. And if you love it, please share it. Get it in front of as many Broncos fans as humanly possible, because without your guys' support, we could not do what we do best, which is cover your Denver Broncos. Now, Erick, with that said, any big plans this weekend?
No.
No?
Is it a holiday?
No, it's not.
Oh, okay. No.
Oh, okay. I just wasn't sure if there was anything fun going on. Maybe take Bug out
supposed to rain.
Never mind then. Screw me and everything that I like to do on the weekend. All right. No, I'm just playing. But anyways, guys, no big plans for me either. Just still kind of recovering. I had some health issues. I'm not going to get into the details on that. Feeling a lot better though, but been off of work for the last week. Anyways, guys, we're going to get the hashtag out of here. You all stay safe and take care. Have a great weekend. We will see you guys same time, same place next week. And as always,